Hello, my name is David Katz, and welcome to my YouTube channel, katzcollective.net. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about my personal journey of self-transformation and how I have been able to create more happiness, more confidence, and more mindfulness in my everyday life. This has been a journey that's taken me a lot of time. It's taken me a lot of ups and downs. It's taken me a lot of pain, and a lot of suffering. It isn't easy to change, and it is not easy to grow, but it's worth it. Self-transformation for me is the idea that we aren't necessarily changing or who we are necessarily. We're just growing into the person that we always could be. You're stripping away the fear, I feel like, and getting rid of the insecurity. And through that, you become more confident in who you are. But that person, I believe, is always there. This is just my opinion, obviously, but I feel like who you become when you face your fear is someone you always were, but was hiding behind that fear. I think our growth isn't us actually changing as an individual, but it's growing as the individual that we already had within us. That's my opinion. Could very well be wrong. But nonetheless, I've found a lot of value in my journey within these past 4 years, and I hope that what you can take away from this video will help you as well. So my journey to self-transformation, I think, stemmed from a lot of things. Growing up, I had a bald spot on the back of my head. I still have that bald spot on the back of my head. It's a scar that I was born with. And I was so afraid that people would judge me for that scar that I wore a hat over it for about 7 years. Whenever I was in public, I would cover it up with a hat. Because I was so afraid that if someone saw that scar, that bald spot, whatever you'd like to call it, that they would judge me negatively for it. That I would not get their approval. That they would think less of me. And so I hid behind that hat for 7 years. Of course, it felt good when I was in my security blanket, or my security hat, or whatever term you'd like to use. But I wasn't really going anywhere. And I wasn't helping myself in any really important way. But I didn't know how to cope with what could happen. It was extremely difficult for me. And so because of that, because I didn't know how to work with my insecurity and my fear, I just hid from it, which of course never really worked in the way that I would have liked it to. But I didn't know any better. So I wore it through high school, and even after that, in my first couple of years outside of high school as well. Up until I was about 21 years old. It was a long time. I started in 8th grade wearing that hat, all the way until I was 21. I had in high school a lot of social anxiety. I had a lot of fear. I had a lot of insecurity. I didn't fit in with other people. I tried too hard to get people to like me. And as a result, I suffered quite a lot. And again, I didn't know any better. I didn't know why I would feel the way I did or what I was doing. It was just how I thought I operated and how life was. And I just assumed I wasn't someone who would fit in. Of course, I'm not the only one who feels this way. But let me be the first person, or at least a person, to tell you that it isn't true. That whatever you fear, isn't true. That your negative and irrational thinking are just thoughts. They're just feelings. They aren't facts. They aren't real. So when I started leaving high school, I went to college for a year, still had the same problems, couldn't really function as an adult at that point, and dropped out after a year. I then got diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and social anxiety disorder. And there was a part of me, after a bit, that wanted to cure myself of whatever it was that I thought was wrong with me. I wanted to rid myself of whatever I thought was ailing me. And so I started obsessing a little bit about it, which was another habit I have, obsessive thinking, where I would obsess about how I was going to change, how I was going to get rid of whatever was holding me down. I went to see a therapist who specialized in attention deficit disorder. I started taking all different kinds of medications, none of which I felt comfortable with, and none of which I stayed on long enough to know whether it was truly going to help me or not, but I don't know that it would have. Because I think in order for me personally to get the full benefit of what has helped me in these past 4 years, I found that medication for me was nothing more than a way to ease the symptoms while I worked on them myself. Medication can help, and I'm not here to I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not here to tell you one way or the other, but I just know that medication was part of the solution, but it wasn't the whole solution. And I think it takes at least one of those two pieces of the puzzle. But if you need medication, then by all means, they can very well help. But nonetheless, after seeing a therapist for attention deficit disorder for about, months on end, and not really getting what I was looking for, I started obsessing about social anxiety disorder, because I really had this idea that I wanted to be a confident person who would be able to go up to anybody and talk to them. I had this idea in my head of who I wanted to be, and it became such a it became so insidious in kind of how I went about it, that I was doing myself more harm than good by focusing on it. I started looking into different things online on how to work with my social anxiety disorder. I started obsessing about how I could fix myself from social anxiety disorder. Every day was a new fixation on how I was going to help myself. I eventually looked into cognitive behavioral therapy, and I saw that there were psychologists in Seattle who taught this kind of therapy. I went to one psychologist, quickly bounced to another one that I had heard of, and that's who I've seen to this day, 4 years later. But when I first started seeing him, I went through something called a thought loop, which when you are obsessively focused on something, through time it can turn into a sort of circular motion of this thought playing over and over and over again in your head. And it was at a point where I became completely terrified of what was happening to me. I wasn't sure I was going to get out of this thought loop that was in my head. I wasn't sure I was going to ever be able to function. And 24/7 I wasn't able to focus on anything except that thought, with no escape. That lasted for about 4 months, and that was the most difficult time of my life. My therapist helped me get through it, through different crazy things, all the way from putting a rubber band around my wrist and snapping it whenever the thought came up, to having to desperately focus on the moment of what was around me, what I smelled, what I touched, what I tasted, yada, 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 all the senses, using those just to try to focus on something else. And it became so hard for me that I couldn't function in everyday life around other people. And I honestly didn't know what was going to happen to me. But 4 months later, I got through it. And 4 years later, I've gotten through, in my opinion, mostly all of my social anxiety, and become not only who I aspired to be, but in my opinion, more. What we want changes as we change. And so I'm sitting here now telling you that no matter what happens to you in your life, you are more than that. You are more than your most difficult moments in your life. And if you get through those moments, then there's nothing you can't do. And that is proof. I'm thankful for the things that have happened to me. For if I didn't experience those things, I wouldn't be who I am today. Hardships are a moment of teaching in disguise, if we allow them to be moments of teaching. If you go through something, that doesn't mean you can't change or grow through it. Self-transformation is something anyone can do. Something anyone, in my opinion, should do. And so how you go about doing it, self-transformation, is you look at the way that you think. Because your thoughts create your feelings, and your feelings create your reality. And so if you change the way you think, then you change your reality. So you face your fears, you look at the way you think, you actively work with the way you think. Learn to embrace what you go through. Be patient, because these things take time. Allow yourself to fail over and over again. Focus on progress and not perfection, because perfection isn't real. There's only progress. And understand that you have the capacity to do and become anything you want, within reason, of course. My name is David Katz, and you are watching katzcollective.net. If you like this video, please subscribe below. Go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Comment if you wish on any help you may need. And check out my blog, katzcollective.net. That's KATZKOLLECTIVE.net. Appreciate it.